class is full. The door has closed. But for Miss Elara Voss, there is one final truth to face, and it does not lead to freedom. In this haunting conclusion to the final lesson, the line between student and teacher dissolves. The 13th desk is no longer empty. Step into the last chapter of this unforgettable horror tale where memory binds and the lesson never truly ends. It was precisely 12 o'clock a.m. when the bell rang. Not the kind that chimed gently, like an antique grandfather clock in an old house, but a sharp metallic clang that echoed through the narrow concrete halls of Blackridge Secondary, rattling the glass panes of the classroom windows. The sound vibrated with a wrongness that Miss Elara Voss couldn't quite name, though she felt it deep in her chest. Her fingers tightened slightly around the attendance sheet. The ink from her pen smudged faintly by the sweat on her palm. The lights overhead flickered, as they always did when the night class began. It was her 3rd month teaching this late elective. Officially, it was called Remedial Literature and History. Unofficially, everyone referred to it as the last lesson. It was a peculiar arrangement. Students who couldn't attend daytime classes for reasons no one seemed to question. They arrived without fail at midnight, dressed in clean uniforms, sitting perfectly upright, their eyes fixed on her. And they never spoke out of turn. The room, 3C, was always cold, far colder than the rest of the building. She had reported it to maintenance twice. Each time, the response was the same. No faults found, no drafts, no reason it should be 15 degrees colder than the hall. Tonight, the classroom felt colder than usual. Miss Voss glanced at the door as it creaked open. One by one, her students entered. 12 of them. Always 12. She had never seen any of them outside class, never caught them in the cafeteria or the courtyard. And yet here they were, punctual, predictable, precise. Her pen hovered over the attendance sheet. Ashley Crow, she said quietly. The girl in the 2nd row, nearest the window, raised her hand in a slow, mechanical motion. Her eyes were too large, too pale. Her hair, black and tightly braided, looked damp, as if she had walked through rain. But outside, it had been dry for hours. "Present," she murmured, voice thin as air. "Malcolm Reese." "Present," came the reply from the boy near the back. He never blinked. Not once in any of the 12 nights she had taught this class. "Caleb Winters, Nina Lamb, Eli Trent." She called out the names. All 12. All present, as always. But tonight, as she moved to place the sheet back on her desk, her pen rolled from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The noise echoed, unnaturally loud. She froze. No one moved. Then it started again. Clang! The bell, not the regular one, that only rang once at midnight. This was different, softer, deeper, as if it were being struck slowly, deliberately in some far-off chamber beneath the school. Elara turned her head toward the window, unsure of what she expected to see. The courtyard was empty, shrouded in moonlight. A slow breeze stirred the branches of the trees, and somewhere in the distance she thought she heard a whisper. No, more like the brushing of fingers against glass. She blinked and turned back to the class. They were all staring at her now. All 12, their heads tilted ever so slightly. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. Let's begin with the reading. She turned to the blackboard, chalk trembling slightly in her grip. Her hand scrawled the title from the curriculum, The Hollow Man. The letters were uneven. Her own handwriting looked alien to her. Then came the sound, a scratching, slow, deliberate, from behind the blackboard. She stopped writing. The scratching continued, then ceased. She turned slowly, half expecting the class to react. But they sat still, eyes locked on her, expressions blank, mouths shut in eerie synchrony. No one else had heard it. She glanced at the board again. There, beneath her writing, a new line of text had appeared in jagged chalk. "Do you remember us?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. She staggered back. "Which of you did this?" No one answered. Her voice rose, almost a whisper. "Ashley? Malcolm? Anyone?" They did not blink. A low hum filled the room. It wasn't electrical. It sounded wet, like breath drawn through fluid. She stepped forward past the first row, toward the desks. Her heels tapped hollowly on the floor. The hum faded, and another sound took its place. Drip! From somewhere above. She looked up. Nothing. The ceiling tiles were stained in places, but nothing moved. No sign of water. Yet the sound persisted. Drip, 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 like something leaking just above her head. Then her gaze dropped to the far corner of the classroom. There was a puddle forming, dark, thick, the color of old blood. She staggered back, mouth parting to scream, but again the class remained still. She blinked. The puddle was gone. She spun back to the board. The extra sentence had vanished too. Just her uneven title remained. She felt dizzy. "Page 14, she said aloud. More to herself than the students. Chairs creaked. 12 sets of hands moved in perfect unison, turning pages. ... The sound of paper folding was louder than it should have been, almost crackling like burning leaves. And then the 13th desk scraped back. The sound carved through the silence like a blade. There was no 13th student. Not until now. Her eyes slowly followed the sound and saw the empty desk in the back row shift forward, as if someone had just sat down. The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged before her. Then a whisper crawled into her ear. Not spoken aloud, yet clear. "I missed the last lesson." Her blood froze. She turned. Nothing. Except on the blackboard, the chalk had moved again. ... The new message read, "You owe us a final grade." Her knees nearly buckled. 12 pairs of eyes still watched her. But now a 13th shadow stretched long across the tiles. And the bell rang again, sharp, shrill, final. Somewhere far below, beneath concrete and bone, the dead had returned to class. The morning after the 13th desk scraped across the floor, Miss Elara Voss sat at her kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea. Steam coiled faintly from the rim, then faded like breath lost in cold air. She stared at the grain of the wooden tabletop. her fingers lightly grazing the worn edge, as if trying to ground herself in something solid, something alive. But all she could see was the shadow that wasn't supposed to exist. She had left the classroom in silence the night before. She hadn't even dismissed the class. She simply turned, walked out, and didn't stop until she was in her car with the doors locked and the heater blasting to fight the chill that clung to her like damp fog. She had dreamed of the classroom again, of the scraping noise, of the 13th desk, and of the whisper, "I missed the last lesson." Her phone buzzed, jolting her. It was a message from the school office. Just a short line. "Confirm you will be present for tonight's class. Mr. Harrow is still on leave." She wanted to say no. She wanted to resign. But something stopped her. A feeling she couldn't name. Like the cold curiosity that makes people peek through a half-open attic door or peer into a mirror after midnight. By 11:45 p.m., she was parking in the faculty lot. Again. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, casting dull, uneven pools of illumination. Her heels tapped across the floor, but the sound seemed swallowed, muffled by something unseen. As she passed the trophy case near the science wing, she caught a flicker of movement in the reflection. A shape. Not behind her, in front of her. She turned sharply. Nothing. Only her own reflection stared back, but it seemed slower than her actual movements, a beat behind. Its eyes lingered too long. Its breath fogged the glass, and hers did not. She kept walking. Room 3C's door was ajar when she reached it. She never left it open. Never. The handle was ice cold. Inside, the classroom was as she left it. Desks aligned, chalkboard clean, her own materials placed neatly on the podium. But she noticed something different. Every desk had a paper on it. 12 essays. No student names, just a single word, written in identical block letters across each cover sheet. Final. She picked up the one closest to her. The paper was aged, yellowed, edges brittle, but the ink was fresh, slightly wet to the touch. She flipped the page. Her breath hitched. It was not an essay. It was a list. A list of dates and names. Names she didn't recognize until she got to the bottom. Elara Voss, October 12th, 2009. She dropped the paper, her knees buckled slightly, hand gripping the edge of the desk. That was her graduation year. But she never attended Blackridge back then, not even the same district. A whisper skated through the room, low, guttural, dry as bone. "Take your seat, Miss Voss." The voice was behind her, but when she turned, the room was empty and full. Every desk was now occupied. 12 students, not breathing, not blinking, all staring. And in the back, where the 13th desk had appeared the night before, the chair was now pulled out, empty, waiting. Elara backed up toward the door, but it was gone. Where the doorway had been, there was now only black, a wall of darkness, pulsing faintly like the inside of a throat. She reached out, but her hand passed through cold air that felt wet, like mist inside a cave. She turned back to the students. Malcolm Reese slowly raised a hand. Elara felt her heart stutter. "Yes," she said automatically, like muscle memory. He stood up. From his chest, Something dripped. It was thick, dark, tar or ink or something worse. It pooled on the floor beneath him. He opened his mouth. A low, dragging sound spilled out. Not words, not a moan, but something like a tape being rewound slowly, impossibly distorted. Then he spoke. I failed. I didn't want to, but you gave me a D. Elara's hands trembled. I don't understand. He took a step forward. You said participation mattered. You said I wasn't present enough. The other students were standing now, too. All of them, in unison, silent, still, except their eyes. Their eyes moved, twitching violently in their sockets, like marbles in water. The 13th desk groaned, and this time, something sat down in it. Not someone, something. Its presence made the room tilt. The lights above hissed and popped. The air grew too heavy, pressing against Elara's lungs. She couldn't breathe. She looked to the chalkboard. It was writing itself. Lines scratched in invisible chalk, each stroke sounding like bone against stone. We were here, you forgot us. The chalk cracked, the board split. Behind it, darkness oozed through the cracks like ink from a dying pen. Then came the hum again, that same wet, mechanical buzz, like a machine chewing flesh. Elara stumbled backward. Her foot struck something. The essay. Her own name, now underlined, smeared in red. She picked it up. New words had appeared at the bottom. Final grade incomplete. Her head throbbed. The students took another step forward. The thing in the 13th seat exhaled, a long, wet rattle that smelled of soil and old paper. Miss Voss! A chorus of 12 voices whispered in unison. You never stayed after class. The bell rang. This time, it didn't stop. It rang again and again, and the desks were never empty. Elara Voss awoke with blood under her fingernails. She sat upright in bed, heart pounding like a drum inside her skull, and stared at her hands. There was no wound, no pain, just the dry, dark crust of something that wasn't hers. Her bedroom was dark. The clock on her nightstand blinked 11:43 p.m. It couldn't be. She didn't remember coming home. The last thing she recalled was the essays, the voice in the 13th desk, the walls swallowing her name in red ink. After that, only flashes. Cold tile, a breath against her neck, something crawling behind her eyes. And now she was here, in bed, in her home, with her coat still buttoned and shoes still on, and blood under her nails. The bell rang again. Not outside, not in the school. In her house, clear, sharp, one single metallic clang that reverberated through the air, shaking the framed photographs on her wall. Elara stood on trembling legs. Her phone was dead. No light, no signal. Even the screen wouldn't turn on. She staggered to the door, reached for the handle, and it opened on its own. Not fast, not violent, just slow. Like someone had been waiting on the other side, but there was no one in the hallway. Only shadows, stretching too far, and something else. A piece of paper, folded neatly, resting at her feet. She picked it up. It was her attendance sheet. 12 names. One empty line at the bottom. 13. She knew what it meant. The house felt tighter now, the air pressing against her temples, thick with static. She turned, walked to the mirror in her hallway. There was something written across the glass in fog. Take attendance. The letters faded as she watched. Her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. Her hands trembled as she stepped back, heart pounding with a rhythm that didn't match her own. She didn't remember the drive. One moment, she was in her hallway. The next, she was walking through the front doors of Blackridge. No lights, no staff. The clock above the main office pointed straight up. Midnight. Room 3C's door was wide open. The desks were full, again. 12 students. Perfectly still, perfectly seated, all waiting. She walked to the podium. The attendance sheet was already there. Her pen sat beside it. She picked it up, the metal cold as bone. "Ashley Crow," she called. "Present," came the soft, breathless reply. "Malcolm Reese, present." The names continued. Each one answered in turn. But tonight, something was wrong. As she moved down the list, she noticed it. Every voice echoed, not just off the walls, but inside her. She could hear them behind her eyes, in her teeth, whispering along her jawbone. "Caleb Winters, present." "Nina Lamb, present." And then she reached the bottom. There was a new name. No, not written, not printed, scratched, gouged into the paper like claw marks. Thomas Voss. She stopped breathing. Thomas, her brother, dead 10 years now, drowned in a frozen lake. They never found his body. Only his backpack and coat on the bank, frozen stiff as statues. She stared at the name until her eyes blurred. "No," she whispered. "You're not part of this. This isn't real." A breath blew across her neck. Then, behind her, scrape. The 13th desk moved. She turned slowly, knees locked. There he was. Her brother. Or something wearing his face. He looked 12 again, just like the day he vanished. Pale skin, wet hair clinging to his forehead. Lips blue, eyes wide, but wrong. Too dark, too empty, like holes carved into porcelain. "Elle, you forgot me." His voice cracked like ice, dry and hollow and aching. "You said you'd come back." She staggered backward. "I didn't know. I thought you were gone." The students watched silently, unblinking. Thomas stood now. He reached into his soap jacket and pulled out a notebook. It was hers, her handwriting, doodles from high school, old lesson plans, and pages at the back filled with notes she didn't remember writing. "They don't leave if you call their names. The bell wakes the dead. 13 must be complete." She dropped it. Her ears rang. The lights flickered above. The shadows lengthened, and from somewhere above came the sound of something walking across the ceiling. Heavy, dragging. She looked up and whispered, "What do you want from me?" Her brother's face cracked, not with emotion, but literally, thin lines spiderwebbed across his cheek. When he spoke again, it was not his voice, it was hers. "Take attendance." The walls shook. The classroom lights popped and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. She was falling, spinning, caught in a spiral of whispers and chalk dust, until a single spotlight cut through the void. She stood in it, alone. Her voice echoed into the black. Thomas Voss. A pause. Silence. Then, softly, present, the bell rang once more, sharp, final, and this time she didn't wake up. The chalkboard was breathing. It rose and fell in slow, unnatural pulses, as if lungs had been buried beneath its surface and were struggling to exhale. Miss Elara Voss stood frozen before it, the air around her thick with the scent of mildew and scorched paper. Her limbs were heavy, her thoughts slow, as though time had begun to drag its feet the moment she spoke her brother's name. Thomas Voss, present. The words echoed still, not from her lips anymore, but from the walls, the floor, the very air. She wasn't in her classroom anymore. Not really. The desks were gone. So were the students. In their place stood rows of towering shelves, each filled with crumbling notebooks and stained ledgers, their pages fluttering though there was no wind. The walls groaned. Somewhere in the dark, a bell tolled, not once, not twice, but 13 times, each note deeper than the last, vibrating the bones beneath her skin. Elara stepped forward. The floor beneath her was tiled, but cracked. The pattern was wrong. The tiles were made of slate. No, chalkboard. Deep scratches ran through them, like desperate fingernails trying to claw their way out. Her heels clicked sharply with each step, the sound swallowed quickly by the oppressive silence that followed. She was moving toward the board, the only thing in the room still familiar. It stood tall at the front of the space, stretching from floor to ceiling. Its surface was no longer matte black. It shimmered, oily, reflecting her face with grotesque distortion. Then it spoke, not with a mouth, but with chalk. The first line appeared in jagged strokes. You heard him. Now you see us. Elara stumbled back. No, she said aloud. You're not real. The chalk moved again, this time faster, more frantic. We were always real. You wrote us down. Her breath caught in her throat. She remembered the old journal, the one Thomas had shown her, pulled from the soaked lining of his jacket. It had been hers, but not a journal, a teacher's planner, a prototype she had filled during her training years ago. She had created fake student names, written fake grades, made up backstories for mock attendance exercises. 12 names, one class, all dead. She sank to her knees. I didn't mean it, she whispered. You were just practice. The board screamed. Not a sound, not a noise. A scream. The chalkboard screeched with high-pitched friction as words tore across its surface with invisible force. We sat, we waited, you never came. A sharp crack rang through the room as a long fracture split the board straight down the center. From the opening, a thin black liquid oozed, dripping onto the floor and spreading like veins across the chalk tile. Elara scrambled back. Whispers rose. Voices, hundreds of them, hissing from the board, each overlapping, each echoing the other like feedback from a broken intercom. She never took my paper. I raised my hand. Why didn't she call my name? I was there. She forgot me. Voices began to swell. The air trembled. The lights above, dim orbs hanging like dead stars, burst one by one, raining glass that turned to ash before it hit the floor. Elara screamed, and the voices stopped. Not faded, stopped instantly. In the silence that followed, only one sound remained. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound of chalk on board, but not coming from the front of the room anymore. Behind her. She turned slowly. There was another board. She hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there before, but now it was. Smaller, older, the kind that hung in children's classrooms with wooden trim and rusted brackets. On it, a single line was written in perfect cursive. "Do you remember what you promised us?" She shook her head, tears prickling the edges of her vision. I don't remember." The chalk on that board began to move again, this time writing her words. "I don't remember." Then the reply followed. "You said you would finish the lesson." A loud pop cracked through the air. The classroom began to rot. The walls peeled, the ceiling sagged, the floor warped, and from the shadows beneath the cracked chalkboard, hands emerged. Not skeletal, not monstrous, just small, student hands. One by one, they gripped the floor and pulled. 12 heads rose. Not corpses, not children, something in between. Their eyes glowed faintly with an inner light, not fire, but memory. Their mouths opened in unison, and they spoke, in her voice. "Class is in session." Elara turned and ran. She didn't think, didn't look. She crashed through a side door, down a twisting hallway that hadn't been there before. The corridor was narrow, its walls covered in old report cards and detention slips. Her own name on every single one. Elara Voss. Failed to report. Missed assignment. Absent. Incomplete. The hallway twisted again. Now it opened to a stairwell. She took it. Down. 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 Until the steps ended at a single wooden door. Room 3C. Again. But the door was different now. Covered in writing. 100 names scratched into the wood. Most faded, some fresh. Her hand reached for the handle. Burning cold. She pushed. Inside, the classroom was empty, clean. Daylight poured through the windows. Normal. Ordinary. She looked to the board. It was blank. Only her own reflection stared back. And then her reflection smiled. She did not. It raised a hand and wrote. Without chalk, just a fingertip against the surface. "See you tonight." The bell rang, and the classroom faded. The envelope sat on her desk like it had always been there. Elara didn't remember bringing it in. She didn't remember unlocking her classroom. Didn't remember driving to school. But there she was, standing in room 3C, sunlight pouring in through the blinds as if the night hadn't swallowed the room just hours earlier. She reached for the envelope with a hand that didn't feel like hers. It was made of thick paper, yellowed and brittle at the edges, sealed not with glue, but with melted wax. No emblem, just a deep red circle, almost like a fingerprint, almost like blood. Her name was written on the front in sharp, angular cursive. Miss Elara Voss. She broke the seal. Inside were pages, folded tight, heavy with moisture. She pulled them out slowly, afraid they might tear apart in her hands. They were homework assignments, dozens of them, all written in different hands, all by students she never taught. Names she didn't recognize, but dates she did. Each one had the same title scribbled at the top in bold, frantic ink, The Final Lesson. She flipped through the first few. The content was incoherent. Scrawled phrases, blacked out lines, bloodstains. One was written entirely in a looping spiral, as if the writer had lost all sense of direction. Another was soaked through and stuck to a brown leaf, and then she found one with her name at the top. Name Elara Voss. Date October 12th, 2009. The essay was short, just one sentence. You can only leave if someone takes your place. She dropped it. The paper hit the floor with a wet slap. Behind her, something rustled. She spun, breath caught in her throat. The desks were full again. 12 students, silent, still. No one had entered the room. No door had opened. But they were here. Again, Elara backed toward the board, eyes darting from face to face. She knew them now, not their names, but their stories. She didn't know how. It was like the room had told her in whispers, and every one of them held a paper in their hand. Homework. They moved toward her. One step, then two. The sound of shoes against tile. Shuffling, slapping, wet. Elara dropped to her knees, hands scrambling for the pages she had discarded. One paper floated up on its own, drifting gently to rest at her feet. The handwriting was hers, the name too. Elara Voss, assignment, exit strategy. Under it was a single instruction: find a substitute. The bell rang, only once. It was not metallic, not sharp. It was a funeral bell, a deep, resonant knell that pulsed through the classroom walls like thunder trapped under stone. And then she remembered. She had taken this class once. Not as a teacher, as a student. A decade ago. Back in the old building, before they demolished the East Wing. There had been a Miss Harrow. That was the teacher. She'd gone missing. They said she quit, but Elara remembered staying after class once. Alone. The classroom cold. The bell ringing again. She had written something that night. A fake assignment. A joke. I'd teach this class if I had to. Now she was. And Miss Harrow's name. It was on one of the papers in the envelope, dated the year she vanished. Elara looked up. The 13th desk was empty. Waiting. The students stood silently. Their homework dropped onto her desk, and in unison they spoke. You are the final lesson. The lights died. The door closed. And somewhere far beneath the floor, a pen began to scratch across paper. Writing a name. A new teacher. Miss Elara Voss stood before the faculty bathroom mirror and watched herself not blink. Her reflection tilted its head, just slightly, the wrong way. She hadn't moved. The overhead fluorescent bulb buzzed and popped, casting spasms of light across the cracked tile. The mirror was fogged slightly at the edges, Yet her reflection remained too sharp, too present, like it was watching her, not mimicking her. She turned away. The reflection didn't. It lingered and smiled. Her knees weakened. The ceramic sink felt colder than the air as she gripped its sides, trying to remember how to breathe. It was daylight. It had to be. She could feel the warmth of it seeping faintly through the classroom windows down the corridor. She had just finished a morning staff meeting. The principal had asked if she was doing all right, noting her pale skin and shaking hands. She lied. She always lied. Everything looked normal in daylight. The desks were empty. The chalkboard was clean. The door to room 3C opened and closed without protest. But shadows moved in the corners of her vision. And every time she passed a reflective surface, she caught glimpses of faces that weren't her own. Children, watching, waiting. Tonight would be the 6th night. She had tried not coming back. She had driven to a motel on the edge of town and checked in under a different name. She had thrown her phone into a river and torn up her ID. She hadn't slept, not really. But at 11:59 p.m., she was standing at the door of room 3C again, key in hand, the envelope full of homework tucked into her coat pocket like a wound. There was no escape, only delay, only substitution, only repetition. The hallway lights flickered as she approached the classroom. Tonight. The windows were blacked out, not by curtains, by something thick, something wet, something that moved slightly when she stared too long. She stepped inside. All 12 students were present. So was the 13th desk. And now, a 14th. She felt it before she saw it, a shifting in the air, the slow stretching of a space that should not have stretched. The desk sat near the back now, not behind, beside, equal. A new seat for someone new, but it was still empty. The classroom was silent except for one sound. Tap, tap, tap. Elara turned toward the windows. Something tapped on the glass. Not rain. Fingernails. The surface pulsed slightly beneath her fingertips. She leaned in. On the other side, eyes. Dozens. Too many. Pressed against the surface like fish beneath ice. Wide-eyed. Bloodshot. Dead. One sec blinked. Not all. Just one. And she knew them. Her own eyes. From the mirror. She stumbled back, heart racing. Behind her, the chalkboard began to write. The sound was sharp, precise, like nails dragged across a coffin lid. The substitute has been chosen. She turned. Her name was gone from the board. In its place, a new one. Matthew Griggs. She knew that name. Another teacher. He had replaced the previous drama instructor after a car accident. She had spoken to him once. Quiet, nervous. Said he didn't believe in ghosts. "Where is he?" she whispered. The room answered. The floorboards beneath the 14th desk groaned. A small crack appeared, then another. From the dark split between the wood, a hand reached out. It was long, thin, pale. It grasped the edge of the desk. Another hand followed, then a head. Matthew Griggs' face emerged, contorted. Frozen in a screen, mouth full of soil, eyes wide with recognition, he saw her, and he wept. The students did not move, but their lips curled upward. They were smiling. The chalkboard scratched again. "You passed the lesson on!" Elara fell to her knees. "No," she whispered. "I didn't choose him. I didn't." The chalk wrote again. "You thought about it. That was enough." A loud crack snapped through the classroom. The 14th desk collapsed in on itself, swallowing the man whole. The floor healed. The boards smoothed. The room grew quiet. And then the lights died. Only the chalkboard glowed now. A single sentence remained. One seat open. 3 nights left. Elara looked at the students. They stared back. Not angry, not pleading, just patient, as if they had waited decades already. And could wait decades more, until every seat was filled and every name was remembered. Behind her, the mirror on the hallway wall shattered without warning, and the sound of glass was not the only thing that screamed. The first thing Elara noticed was the silence. It wasn't the ordinary quiet of an empty hallway or the stillness of a closed classroom. It was heavy, a silence that pushed against her ears like deep water, swallowing every sound before it could be born. Not even the faint hum of electricity remained. She stood outside room 3C, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Tonight felt different, wrong. The hallway lights were dimmer than usual, flickering at irregular intervals. The air smelled of dust and old wood, but beneath it, something else. The faint scent of burnt paper and something metallic, rust or blood. Elara didn't want to go in. But her legs moved anyway. The door creaked open. The room was empty. No students, no shadows, no shifting air, no scraped chalkboard or wet window panes. Just 12 neat desks and one at the back. 13. She stepped inside slowly. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, the sound echoing longer than it should have. The board was clean. The chalk tray was bare. The windows were open. That alone chilled her. They had never been open before. Cold wind whispered through them now, carrying the soft rattle of leaves and something else. A dragging sound, faint but growing. Elara turned toward the door and saw him. A boy she didn't recognize. He stood just past the threshold, soaked from head to toe, water dripping from his school uniform. His skin was pale and bloated, his lips slightly parted, his eyes empty, but not dull. They shimmered faintly with something beneath the surface, like a memory trying to surface through frost. He stepped forward. His shoes squelched. A trail of water followed him, darkening the tiles. Elara spoke without thinking. "You're late." The boy blinked slowly. "I missed the bus." His voice was muffled, like he was speaking through wet cloth. Words filtered through water. She looked around. The other desks were still empty. No one else had come tonight. Only him. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy raised his hand, then pointed to the attendance sheet resting on her desk. She picked it up. 12 names. The 13th line was blank, and as she watched, letters began to appear in that space, scratched into the paper without pen or pressure. Daniel Hale. The name stirred something in her, not recognition, but fear. She'd seen that name once, not in the school records. Not in old yearbooks, but in the basement archives, buried beneath the administrative office in a file labeled Internal Reports. Do not remove. Daniel Hale. Missing. Last seen attending Blackridge Secondary. Last class on record, remedial literature and history. Her class. The boy looked at her. You didn't call my name last time, he said. I wasn't here, Elara whispered. He stepped forward again. You were, just not yet. She didn't understand, but the room did. The lights flickered once, then dimmed completely. The wind stopped. The windows slammed shut all at once, the sound cracking like gunfire. The board began to write, not in chalk. In water, lines of moisture crawled down the black surface, etching words that shimmered in the dim light. You can't teach what you won't remember. Daniel sat in the 13th desk. It groaned beneath him, wood creaking as if under immense weight. Not his, something deeper, something older. The floor beneath him rippled slightly, as if paper thin over deep water. Elara stepped back. I don't understand, she said again, her voice shaking. Daniel smiled. It was a slow, wide, broken expression. You wrote me once, in a story, as a child. The memory slammed into her. A writing assignment, her senior year. A short story for extra credit. She had named the main character Daniel Hale. He drowned in the ending, trapped in a school after hours. A bell that rang 13 times. A teacher who never left. You wrote me but forgot me, Daniel whispered. But I remembered you. His eyes were changing now. They shimmered with ink. Words floated inside them. Sentences, names, as if his body had become a page, written full and still unfinished. The board wrote again. Your lesson is leaking. Water began to drip from the ceiling. It wasn't rain. It was ink, thick, black. It slid down the walls, pooling on the floor. From every desk, a hand emerged. 12 hands. Each one gripping a soaked essay. Elara turned in a slow circle, heart slamming against her ribs. The classroom was filling. The students were returning, one by one, from the walls, from the floor, from the dark behind her thoughts. She ran to the door. It was gone, just blank wall now. A single note appeared where the door had been, written in the same familiar, cruel cursive. You were never absent. The bell rang once, then again, and again, 13 times, each strike louder than the last, each one cracking the walls, the air, the certainty of time. When the final chime echoed through the wet, ink-soaked silence, Daniel Hale stood and smiled. You called my name. Elara sank to the floor, the water rising around her ankles, around her knees. Ink filled her mouth, and she remembered. Writing it all down, every night, every class, every name, every death, and now every return. The alarm clock blinked 12 o'clock a.m., not in red digital digits, but chalk white numbers scratched into the glass. Elara Voss sat upright in bed, drenched in cold sweat. Her breath came shallow, as if her lungs had forgotten how to fill properly. The room was not hers, though everything inside it resembled what she used to call home. The bed, the bookshelf, even the small cactus by the window, all were there, but something was off. Everything was slightly tilted. Not enough to fall, just enough to notice. She stood. Her feet touched the floor, but it didn't feel like wood. It felt soft, damp. She looked down. Black ink pooled at her toes. It was seeping from the cracks between the boards, curling slowly toward her like tendrils. Words floated in the puddles, half-sentences, broken phrases, names she remembered writing once in passing. Characters she created for practice, forgotten. And now they were crawling back. She stumbled to the door. It opened before her hand touched it. Beyond, a hallway stretched far too long for the small apartment she lived in. The walls were lined with desks, each one occupied. Each student bent over a paper, scribbling furiously with hands that no longer looked human. Long fingers, ink-stained skin, eyes glowing with lines of text rather than pupils. One raised its head. It had no face, just a smooth sheet of paper stapled where the eyes and mouth should be. On it, a line was written, "Grade me." Elara turned and ran, but the hallway looped endlessly until she reached room 3C. Always room 3C. She pushed open the door. Inside, the classroom was warped. The ceiling stretched into the dark like a cathedral vault. The walls pulsated with veins of ink. The windows showed no sky, only chalk smears and flashes of forgotten memories. 12 desks, 13 students, and now, one teacher's podium, split down the center, waiting for her. She stepped forward. The students raised their heads in unison. No breath, no sound. Only the tap of pens and the rustle of aged paper. The chalkboard came to life. A single word appeared. Begin. Elara opened her mouth, but she didn't speak. A voice poured out of her throat that wasn't hers. A lesson, one she had never written. Her limbs moved without thought, pointing to diagrams that drew themselves. Writing definitions she didn't recognize, speaking of literary themes that spiraled into madness. The students nodded. They took notes in unison, as if they'd heard this before. 1,000 times, and yet they never graduated. The clock above the board was melting. Its hands spun erratically, then froze at 13 o'clock. And then the bell rang. But it didn't stop. It rang again and again, each chime warping the classroom more. The walls cracked, desks sank into the floor, the board bled ink, and Elara kept teaching. Her voice cracked, her throat bled, her words turned to ash mid-sentence. Still, she couldn't stop, because the lesson was not over. And it never would be. The students raised their hands, all at once, and spoke in chorus. "Can we be dismissed now?" She shook her head. "I don't know how." The 13th desk stood up. Daniel Hale walked slowly to her. He placed a paper on her podium. A single sentence written in crimson ink. "You will keep teaching until someone learns." The page curled at the edges, steaming. The letters writhed. And behind Daniel, the classroom door creaked open. A figure stood in the threshold. A girl, wide-eyed, new, alive. Her backpack hung off one shoulder. Her hair was still wet from the rain. She looked confused. "I'm here for the night class," she said. Daniel smiled. The other students turned toward her. Elara screamed, but no sound came out. The door closed behind the girl. The final desk filled. The board wiped itself clean, and the bell rang one more time. The door to room 3C would not open. Elara Voss stood outside it, her knuckles raw from pounding, her voice long since cracked from shouting. The hallway was dark, not night dark, but blind dark. A hallway stripped of time, of meaning. Behind the door, she heard scratching. Not fingernails, not chalk, shovels, scraping, carving, digging. Earth being moved, stone being cracked, and beneath it all, breathing. Deep, labored, collective breathing. As if the entire room was inhaling something thick and wet. Elara backed away slowly, the key trembling in her hand. She didn't know why she still held it. The key had never worked. The door opened on its own when it wanted, locked only when it was too late. She turned and walked. The hallway stretched longer than she remembered. The school was mutating again. It had a rhythm now, a pulse. Rooms shifting behind closed doors, walls rearranging like thoughts. The intercom crackled with bursts of static every 13 minutes, followed by a whisper no one else seemed to hear. And tonight, it was leading her somewhere else. Classroom 4A. A room she hadn't entered since her first year teaching. It had been sealed off after a ceiling collapse. Maintenance claimed structural damage. Too unstable, unsafe. But she remembered the last day it had been used. A student disappeared. No body, no investigation, just a quiet transfer of records. Now the door stood ajar. It groaned softly as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mold and something older, earthy, like freshly turned soil. The desks were still there, covered in dust, a dozen of them, and one teacher's podium, half rotted, slumped to one side like a dying tree. But the floor was wrong. The tiles didn't match the others in the school. They were darker, uneven, slightly mounded in places, as if something beneath had begun to rise. Elara stepped forward. The dust on the floor stirred around her feet like ash. She crouched beside one of the mounds, brushed the tile clean. Letters emerged beneath her touch, carved into the floor. N.H. 1987. Another desk, another name. L.P. 1992. More names, more years. Every tile bore initials, each a headstone. She moved to the back of the room. The air grew colder. The windows were black with condensation from the inside. Drips ran upward instead of down. And then she saw it. The 13th desk, half sunken into the floor. A mound of earth spilled around its base. Elara reached out. Her hand brushed something soft. Fabric. She pulled gently. A sleeve emerged, still wet. She pulled more. Fingers curled around the desk's edge, lifeless, stained with ink and dirt. Then a face surfaced, wide-eyed, mouth frozen mid-breath. Not rotting, preserved. Daniel Hale, still seated, still watching, still waiting. Her scream caught in her throat. A voice behind her whispered. He never left. Elara turned. A girl stood in the doorway. The new student, the one who had joined them the night before. She stepped into the room without fear. Without hesitation. He told me about this place, she said softly. In a dream, I saw the desk before I ever walked these halls. Elara moved to block her. You can't be here, she said. You have to go. The girl tilted her head. You don't understand, Miss Voss. I've always been here. I just hadn't been called yet. The mound at the 13th desk began to sink. Soil pulled inward, dragging Daniel's body with it, folding the desk beneath the surface like paper curling in fire. The floor rippled, tiles cracked, and from each mound, fingers emerged. Dozens of them, pale, dry, writhing, reaching. The classroom moaned. The walls wept. Elara turned to run, but the doorway was gone. In its place stood a chalkboard. On it, one line written in bone-white letters. ... When the class is full, the teacher sleeps. The new girl sat in the desk closest to the board. She opened a blank notebook and began to write. Behind her, the others emerged, each desk filling. 12, then 13, and at the front, the podium repaired itself, stood tall, waiting. Elara stumbled toward it, every step heavier, her legs resisting, her body no longer hers. The bell rang, not in room 3C, here, in 4A, a bell no one had rung in decades. A bell buried with every forgotten student. Elara took her place at the front of the class. Her hands moved to the attendance sheet. Fresh ink, new names, and at the bottom, ... Elara Voss, present. The ground beneath the desks trembled. The lesson was not over. It had only changed classrooms. The hallway lights no longer flickered. They were gone entirely. Only the dim glow of chalk dust in the air illuminated the corridor as Elara Voss walked, barefoot and silent, toward the last door. The silence around her was absolute. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something listening. Behind her, the school had folded in on itself. Rooms disappeared. Desks turned inward. Hallways collapsed like lungs exhaling for the final time. She did not turn around. There was nothing left to return to. Ahead, at the end of the corridor, a single door waited. It was marked not with a room number, but with a plaque that hadn't been there before. The letters shimmered faintly, etched in the same white lines used on blackboards. Faculty exit, authorized use only. She reached for the handle. It was warm, too warm. The door creaked open to reveal a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Carved into the wall beside it were dates, hundreds of them, years she knew, years she had taught, years before she was born, and beside each date, a name. Some she recognized, others she didn't. All teachers. She descended, step by step. The sound of her breath echoed louder than it should have. She passed more names, more dates. Until she reached a landing. A single desk stood there, half lit by an unseen source. On it, a leather-bound book, thick, dustless, waiting. She opened it. Inside, names were written in precise handwriting. Class rosters, attendance sheets, assignments, grades. It was the ledger of the dead, and her name was on every page, sometimes as a student, sometimes as a teacher, sometimes as both. She flipped to the final page. One sentence had been written in blood-red ink. "You taught us. Now we'll teach you." The wall behind the desk peeled back without sound, revealing a room not made of wood or stone, but of pages. Thousands of them, floating in place, turning slowly in the air. Whispers echoed from each one. Fragments of old lessons, forgotten promises, final words. At the center of the room was the podium, no longer wood. It pulsed like something alive. Behind it, rows of desks, each one full. But this time, the students were not the ones Elara knew. They were older, adults, teachers. Some wore their school badges still pinned to decayed shirts. Others had melted into their chairs entirely, part of the wood. Faces paper thin. They looked at her. She stepped forward. One voice rose from the desks, soft, familiar. It was Miss Harrow. "You did well, Elara. You lasted longer than most." Another voice followed. "Mr. Griggs, I almost made it out. You almost let me go." Elara's hands trembled. "What is this?" she asked. "What happens now?" The room answered. The walls groaned, the pages shifted, and the chalkboard appeared again. Massive, endless. Across its surface, one final sentence appeared, written in bold, shaking lines. "There is no graduation, only succession." The podium cracked open. Inside, a mirror. She looked down. Her face stared back. But behind her reflection, 12 more faces blinked slowly. The class, always the class. Behind them, the 13th desk remained empty, waiting. Elara stepped back. The chalkboard split. A bell rang. Once, twice, 13 times. The air warped. And through the mirror, she saw the classroom again. Room 3C, lit by moonlight. Clean, quiet, waiting. The desks were set, the papers were stacked, the attendance sheet was blank. But at the podium, not her, another teacher, wide-eyed, new, confused, holding the key. Elara cried to scream, but her voice was gone. She was inside the ledger now, trapped between margins and memories, written into the curriculum, a lesson bound in flesh and ink. And as the bell rang, one final time, the door to room 3C opened again.